understanding the different areas of performance nutrition around different sports. So although we're going to talk a lot about endurance sports tonight, so running, swimming, cycling, things like that. If you do have any questions that aren't, particularly related to what we're covering, pop your hand up at the end. I'll have loads of time for questions. And it's a good opportunity for everybody here to be able to ask questions that they're not sure of, because we are kind of bombarded with different kind of nutrition information from different areas, mostly on social media and such, and it can get a little bit confusing. So definitely I'd like everyone here to feel free enough to pop your hand up as we're going through these topics. At the end as well, we're going to go through just basically how to make your own sports drink for running or for cycling or swimming or whatever it is you do, and we'll spend a little bit more about that as we go through. So just a bit about me. My name's Laura Keeley. I have a nutrition consultancy business, Bridge Nutrition, and I mainly work with athletes. Now I do I suppose, education pieces like this, but I mainly work with athletes. And the athletes I work with range from club athletes like yourself, right up to, I work with some Olympic athletes, I work with a lot of inter-county GAA players, and this has probably given me a good insight into what people, the kind of support people need in order to actually improve their nutrition. So in terms of what I do, to get people to actually be able to change their own nutrition habits and to understand what they have to do and to probably make a meaningful impact with that change is to obviously educate. So today you're going to get a bit of education about what you should be doing for your own sport. So be it running, swimming, cycling, if there's any other endurance sports outside of that, just pop your hand up and let me know. But this is the kind of ones we always talk about. Support and demonstrations are big ones again, so we'll always do kind of mini things like this just to show you hands-on what it looks like with real food. But you'll see as we go through this as well that I will show you a lot of real food, day-to-day food that you're going to be able to then, pretty much from today onwards, incorporate into your diet to be just eat a little bit healthier, support your sport a little bit more. Big thing about nutrition and actually kind of improving it on a day-to-day basis for yourself is actually kind of building up your own daily habits. So what I mean by that is we all have our ways of eating, and we get those habits from parents, from our friends, like that from social media, like I just said. So really what you need to do is understand how to change your habits, but also day to day reinforce what you're doing. So why am I changing my habit, or what do I need to do to change my habits? So for the first kind of 10 minutes of tonight, I want to go into just day-to-day eating. So not specifically around fueling or refueling and recovering or competition prep. I just want to talk about for a few minutes why we actually need to prioritize what we eat. What's the difference that it makes to us? So what we eat and drink fuels our body. So obviously for sport, that's a huge thing. Understanding that we actually use a tremendous amount of energy day to day, outside of sport, inside of sport, growth, recovery, immune protection. And if we don't give our body what it actually needs, it breaks down. I think we kind of know that. I think we know when we go down to different routes of, maybe always take Christmas, for example. Those 2 weeks over Christmas, our usual intake kind of goes out the window, and we're having kind of selection boxes for breakfast and Bailey's ice cream for afternoon tea and stuff. So you can then know if you spend a few weeks not eating as you usually do, you can feel a little bit rubbish, a little bit tired, you might get sick. So we do need to understand that what we eat and drink, it refuels and repairs our body as well. And then ultimately, it'll determine how healthy you are. So remember that food has a very cumulative effect and compound effect. So what you eat day to day for health doesn't really make a difference here or there, but it's what you do every day. So it's much like, take a poor example, but it's impactful when I say it. If you were to smoke for one day, wouldn't really do anything to your health. It wouldn't really do a tremendous amount of damage to your body. If you smoke every day for 20, 30 years, it will do a tremendous amount of damage. So food is like the same, or food is much the same. If you eat a very, very nutritious diet for one day, it won't make a difference here or there. If you eat a very nutritious diet day in, day out, for the majority of your days, you'll be very healthy. So what happens when we have, for people like yourself, and you're all training, probably multiple times during the week. And what I often see with athletes at a range of levels, like again, right from club recreational level right up to elite sport, is that we have athletes that will train and train and train. They'll train very, very hard. They'll come, push themselves every week, they enter competitions, and if they don't look to their diet, to their lifestyle to actually support that, we'll see consequences, okay? We'll see things like injury, illness, poor performance, and sometimes burnout as well. Now, I'm not talking about catastrophic injuries. I'm talking about niggles. It's something that I see from team sport athletes, but the endurance athletes I work with, I also see it as well. I also see my endurance athletes getting, I suppose, when we talk about illness, like head colds, chest infections, throat infections, especially during periods of high training load, or potentially in a pre-season where they haven't trained for a few weeks and they go back into training and they don't support their body with the correct nutrition, and ultimately that breaks it down. So you have to think of your training as, every time you train, you put load on your body, no matter what kind of training that is. So if it's kind of high intensity, shorter sessions, if it's longer, lower intensity sessions, if it's strength training sessions, you're putting load in your body. And the idea is that you want your body to adapt. And in that adaptation phase, it gets better. So maybe you get more fit, maybe you're going to get a little bit stronger, maybe your sprint goes up, your sprint capacity goes up. And the issue with that is that if we don't, like I said, if we don't support it with our nutrition, our lifestyle, our sleep, is that our body can't take the load, and then it ends up injured, it ends up sick. Your performance will drop. If you might see yourself training, and you'll get to a stage where I'm getting better, my times are getting better, I'm feeling better on my runs or my cycles, whatever it is, and then it just stops. You hit a plateau, all right? And then you don't get any better, but you're doing all the same stuff you did before, but it doesn't make any sense to you. It can come back to you not supporting your actual training load with your nutrition and lifestyle. So again, we don't want this to happen, okay? We want the positive. So when we can get the right fueling, the right refueling, the right sleep, we see enhanced performance. So ultimately, if you're fueling your body better, you're going to be able to push yourself a little bit harder. Maybe your times will get better. Maybe you'll be more comfortable on those longer runs or those longer cycles. Preventing illness is a big one. So again, what we always want to do when you're part of the multidisciplinary team, so if you're a coach, if you're a nutritionist, if you're a physio, whatever it is that you want your athlete to continue being able to train, compete, and get better. And anything that's going to stop the athlete from doing that, we have to address. So again, if we're looking at niggly injuries, and again, not catastrophic ones, like little hamstring pulls or quad strains or groin strains or back tweaks, anything like that, that may be preventable with the right nutrition support, the right sleep, the right lifestyle, need to be addressed. So promoting training adaptations is a big one there as well. So I kind of touched on that a second ago. So remember, when you're doing your training session, you don't get better within the session. That doesn't happen. More likely, you kind of feel worse as you go through the session, to be honest, because you're using your energy. So you're going to end up slowing down. You're going to end up struggling that little bit more. And again, that comes back to that load we're placing on the body. And that load then, once it's in the rest period, the body then has to adapt. So if you can give your body the right carbohydrate after you've trained, the right protein, healthy fats, fruit and veg, micronutrients, whatever it is, hydration, these training adaptations will be increased. Okay, so if you can train, but you don't give your body the right food, it'll only make certain adaptations. It won't be able to go as far as it can potentially go if it's given the right nutrition. Optimizing our body composition, and then just having the confidence and consistency in preparation. And what that is that if you do have a big race coming up, or whatever it is in your sport that you could have, that when you've gotten your nutrition to an optimal level around training, and then you're ready to go for that competition, and you know what to do before that competition, it's a huge psychological boost because you know you've left no stone unturned. You're fueled up and you're ready to go into it. Just on kind of general nutrition here. So every time I suppose I come in and do one of these talks, and we have the potential for people to go out and start changing their nutrition, or to start trying to maybe include some of the things I say, I want to make it clear that your nutrition never has to be perfect, all right? Your nutrition never has to be the most nutritious overall. Anytime I work with people, I explain to them that you can live a very healthy life, you can have a very successful athletic career by just focusing 80% of your time on these foods. These foods over here, never cut them out. Never try and cut them out. Yeah, if you find you're over-consuming them and they're getting in the way of these foods, you reduce them. But the issue is when people try and eat healthy, what they do is they think that these foods must be removed from the diet. And it just doesn't work long term. All right, I would much rather someone be consistent than perfect when it comes to nutrition. So if you can consistently get 80% of your intake from things like lean meats, whole grains, fruit and veg, beans, peas, lentils, things like that, healthy fat, that's absolutely brilliant. So if you can get 80% of your meals and snacks from these, 20% come in here, because these foods on the right are part of, you know, a takeaway of a Friday night with your family, hanging out with your friends. If you just feel a bit rubbish and you just want to have a day where you're not too worried about your food and you want convenience, all right? It's perfectly fine to have these foods. But when they start getting in the way, if you find you're snacking your whole day on chocolate and fizzy drinks, that means that you're not eating your fruit and veg, or you're not eating your nuts, or you're not having enough dairy, whatever it is, then it's an issue. But it's never an issue if they can live alongside each other. That's how they work. So that's just kind of, I like to kind of lay the law on that one from my approach, because what I seem to think is that as soon as people start changing their diet or trying to change their diet, they try to eliminate these foods completely, and it never works. And ultimately, if you try and do that as well, just another point in those foods, they're not good or bad, okay? Foods are never good or bad. We need to change our vocabulary around food in Ireland, because this idea that these foods are bad and these foods are good, that doesn't work. Because then you start associating guilt with these foods. You start seeing them as like a villain, or, you know, a very negative thing. They're not. It's just food. These foods will not keep you feeling good. These foods they give you low energy. They don't contain a huge amount of nutrients. They won't help you recover from runs or prepare for a cycle. Now, caveat, some things will, which we'll talk about in a second, because we will talk about the impact of sugar on performance. But this is talking about general diet, that we don't try and separate these foods too much, that they do live alongside each other, but we're focusing more on the left. So just onto endurance sports now, just understanding what endurance sport is, okay? So it's continuous ability to sustain submaximal activity level. And what I mean by submaximal is that endurance is not your max effort. And I know any runners here will understand that, but it's just when I start talking about energy systems in a second, it's to clarify that. So endurance sports, kind of things we're looking at, obviously all kinds of running, cycling, swimming, and then canoeing and rowing. So again, we're not going maximal effort, and it's prolonged. I'm going to talk about energy systems in a second, but just on the athletic food pyramid. Now, I use this pyramid, and this pyramid is used from everywhere, again, to recreational club level, like we have here, right up to Olympic level, Premier League soccer, national rugby teams. Everybody would use this, okay? And all it is understanding what our priorities are as athletes. And do think for yourself, if you're competing, if you're training intentionally and you're competing in races or matches, whatever it is, I know predominantly we're probably talking about races today, is that you are an athlete. And if you can consider yourself an athlete and understand that you are an athlete, you'll start eating like one, you'll start thinking like one, you'll start behaving like one, sleeping like one, making the decisions of an athlete. So it starts with here. It starts with your own diet right now. There's really realistically, I don't know what everyone eats in this room, but I'm going to go out on a limb here from my experience. And that is that the food you already eat will help you to be a better athlete. You just need to know what you need to eat more of and less of. And my absolute priority with athletes is getting their energy intake first of all. So getting that right. That's just calories. Because we do have a serious issue of underfueling across all sports, because people don't really know how to fuel properly. So it starts with energy intake, that's our calories. And then we look at carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, which we'll discuss now. We're looking at vitamins and minerals, and then our hydration. And we get all of those things from the food we already eat. You know, the regulars of all the stuff I showed you on the left side, a little bit from the right as well. But really, it's just, we can get very, very distracted, and I see it happening so much. And it is by quite clever marketing. We get very, very, very distracted with supplement companies, with certain foods that are, designed for different macronutrients or different kind of outcomes. And I'll explain this in a second. But this is our priority. We start at the bottom. Then we do look to things like energy drinks, or we'll call them isotonic drinks, not quite energy drinks, because I'm not talking about Red Bull or Monster or anything like that right now. But we look at things like potentially whey protein. If you struggle to get enough protein in your diet, if you struggle to eat after runs, if you struggle to eat after biking, whatever it is, and we need to get some protein in quick, we might look to whey protein. But really, we can really go for a food first approach. And then supplements. And I will talk through towards the end of this talk, I'll kind of just show you what supplements are safe and effective and proven for endurance athletes. But they are the least of our priorities. If you don't get, first of all, your calorie intake right, you've absolutely no point in taking a supplement that's supposed to help your endurance ability. Because this is what your body needs first and foremost. And then the very last thing we look at are supplements. And because we see supplements as something, here, look, I've spent 50 quid on this has to make me a better runner, or this has to make me perform better, that doesn't happen. So really we're going to start with the basics, and then I will kind of touch on the supplements towards the end of this. But this is the very, very basic here. And it's understanding what our energy is. We get our energy from food. Something we seem to forget a lot of is that we get our energy that we need to move around day to day from the food that we eat, the food that we buy. So it's used by our bodies for biological function. Okay, so we use the vast majority of our energy just to stay alive. If you were to lie in bed, if anybody had COVID the last couple of years, and you're a bit like me, you're in bed probably for 2 weeks if you were floored by it, you actually still used a ton of calories just for that biological function. So for our lungs, for our digestion, cognitive function, our hormone health, our immunity health, our bone health, that all takes a lot of calories from our food, okay? And then we've got our movement. So we're not talking about training now, we're just talking about movement. So even me walking around here now, that's taking energy. Doing the shopping, walking the dog, cleaning the house, all takes energy. We've got growth. So any younger people here, you still need a lot of calories from your diet when you're in that growth phase, kind of coming from childhood into your adolescence. And then exercise. So before we even get to our training, we need a lot of calories before that and for our bodies. So the issue that we see more often than not is that people who regularly competitively exercise, so like yourselves, don't eat enough calories to support the rest of their requirements. So mostly our biological function and our movement. And what I mean by that is, I don't have a huge amount of time to talk about tonight because we're trying to cover an awful lot, but there's the prevalence of low energy availability, LEA, is really, really common in endurance athletes because they push their bodies, they make their bodies do a lot of long duration, moderate intensity work, and that will use a tremendous amount of calories. And then what happens is there isn't enough energy left over for our biological function, and it's very, very common. Again, especially in endurance athletes that are training several times a week. And big red flags for that is just we're not getting into it too much here. Big red flags: if you're tired all the time, if you've any kind of a bone break, so a stress fracture, if you're not getting any better at your training, if you're obviously low mood, irritable, anything like that, but if you are getting persistently sick or you're getting persistently injured. All right, so they're all red flags for me when I'm working with athletes that I would think we need to sit down and see if you're actually eating enough. For women, it's definitely if there's any disruption to your menstrual cycle at all. So if it gets longer, if it gets lighter, if you obviously miss a cycle or anything like that, that's a huge red flag as well. So again, I'm not getting massively into it, but it's just understanding that there is huge knock-on effects if we don't give ourselves the very, very basics of enough calories in our diet to support our biological function and exercise. So just on to understanding what substrates you need for your sport. All right, so this is again one I'd always show no matter what kind of athletes that I'm speaking with. So we have three main energy systems. We've got our CP system, which is our phosphocreatine system. We've got our anaerobic system, and then this is our aerobic system. So what I want to focus on here is our aerobic. So you can see aerobic glycolysis and aerobic lipolysis. Sorry. So this is basically our aerobic system using carbohydrates or fat for its energy system. And you can see here that in around this time here, we're going well above 60 seconds into the hours, that it will use a 50-50 of carbohydrate and fat for our fuel source. So that means that it's incredibly important that you fuel with carbohydrates for endurance exercise. And a lot of endurance athletes that I work with don't seem to know this or don't seem to appreciate how many carbohydrates they actually need. Now, you might think, well, maybe will I just have some fat sources before the race either, before my training, and that should work. That doesn't work the same way. Our bodies will actually preferably burn carbohydrates quicker than fat. And anyway, we actually have tens of thousands of worth of calories of fat to use for energy in our body. So we don't actually need to ingest it from a dietary source. Fat will keep carrying you a long time after carbohydrate will. But the thing is, at this intensity, our body, if we can give our body a source of carbohydrate, it will use it for a source of energy and it will help carry us on. So when we're looking at, just quickly guys, this is a little bit of nutrition kind of 101, or if you kind of remember Genius Earth Science, you'll remember this. So just understanding, just in terms of phrases I'm going to use now for the next 10 minutes, macronutrients and micronutrients. So macronutrients are carbs, fats and proteins, and micronutrients are just vitamins and minerals. So just to make sure everyone's clear on that, and I'm just going to speak about carbs now. We're going to talk about fat, we're going to talk about protein after this. An athletic diet, the vast majority of athletic diets are built around carbohydrates. And some sports need a lot more carbs than others, and some need less. But endurance athletes really need to focus on carbohydrates for fueling. And if you can get your carb fueling correct, you'll be very surprised how far you can go if you haven't been looking at it so far. So this is where I make my biggest gains when I first started working with athletes, is getting them tuned in on carbs. And then we'll look to do more kind of, more advanced strategies around fueling, training low, things like that. But if you can kind of tune in on carbohydrates, if you haven't done so before, you'll see huge gains. So this is the recommendations, and you'll see here, this is the gold standard of carb requirements for athletes. And again, this is used from everywhere from kind of a club recreational level right up. So where we start, if you're doing an hour of exercise, you'd want to be aiming for about 5 to 7 kilograms of carbohydrates 5 to 7 grams per kilogram of body weight for carbohydrates per day. So I'm going to show you what that looks like in a second. And then if you're doing more than that, you have to go much higher. And this is where people get quite surprised about how much they actually need, because this is vast amount of carbs, guys. These are big, high carb numbers. Let me show you what that looks like. So again, I've just picked a range of weights. Don't worry if you're above or below these, that doesn't matter. I just want to show you what you should be kind of minimally aiming for. So on an average training day, presumably you're doing about an hour of training. If you're doing more, please respect that you actually should be going, you can see here the recommendation, it is higher. But at the very least, if you're doing an hour, you're aiming for 5 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight. So again, let's just say you're 70 kilos, roughly. That's your minimum. They all look like very arbitrary numbers. I completely appreciate that, all right? I don't expect anybody to know what that looks like in food. But I have to show you the numbers just to kind of, to expose you, one, to them so you understand what they are, but two, to understand that endurance athletes need a lot of carbs to fuel. So if we're looking at far more practically, we'll show you something like this. So roughly, fist, this is where we get away from weighing things. I don't want anybody going down that route because I don't think you can do it long term, to be honest with you. I don't think it's practical, especially if you're out and about, if you're kind of getting your food out, you're getting your lunch out. But if you go with something like this, okay, and we have porridge for breakfast, it means that on a day that you have an hour's worth of training, okay, if you aim for, at least 100 grams of carbs per your main meals and push it up to 120 if you need more or whatever it is. But if you go about the size of your fist, it's roughly 20 grams of carbs, roughly. All right, so if you have 3 big, decent fistfuls of porridge with your morning breakfast, and you add in a bit of honey there, a banana, and a glass of juice, you've made a really, really good high carb fueling breakfast. But your basis starts with this. This is your basis because this is an incredibly healthy, complex carbohydrate source. So we want to make sure we're getting, yes, we could go completely low nutrient and get all the carbs we need, but we're going to have a balance. We're going to have a balance of very, very nutritious source of carbs, and yet then we'll bring in some slightly more processed source of carbs to help bulk it up. But if you start on a day where you've got training that evening and you start off with a big bowl of porridge, like we said, and then for your lunch, maybe you have a bagel, but you'll probably have to add something into that. So maybe you'll have a banana or another apple, or you're going to add a cereal bar in there, whatever it is, to bulk that meal up. And we'll talk about snacks in a second. And then, you'll come home, maybe it's after the training session, or you have a little bit of time before and you have some pasta. Again, it's those 3 to 4 big fistfuls of pasta to make sure you're getting enough. And using this kind of formula will help you fuel that bit easier for your training or races, whatever it is. So we've snacks in between here. So I don't know if anybody can notice that, but there's definitely some snacks on this board that I really particularly I probably wouldn't recommend them for a client that maybe came to me that wanted to improve their nutrition or wanted to start eating a little bit healthier. I'm not going to recommend them, a Nature Valley bar. But if I'd, endurance athlete come to me and tell me that they're feeling tired, they're lethargic, they don't feel like they're eating enough energy for their sport, yeah, I'm going to bring in this kind of food. I'm going to bring in this kind of food because it's easy to eat, it's easy to digest. It's going to give them the energy they need. It's going to give them the carbs they need, the calories they need without filling them up too much. But we do have a balance here. So this is understanding that nutrition for health and nutrition for performance are not the same thing. They overlap. They overlap lots and lots of ways, but they are not the same thing. So again, there will be foods here that you're probably going to go, that's not particularly nutritious, but it's very, very good for performance, and it's going to help you meet those targets that we're talking about. And again, you'll see even more here. Jam and toast, a little bit of nutrition in it, but it's not by far the healthiest thing you can have. Same with jellies, sports drinks, but really good for fueling. And I'll talk about timings and where these foods fit in, but these foods fit in quite close to your training session, quite close to your race, whatever it is. So just on to protein now for endurance. So when I work with team sport athletes, footballers and such, or I work with kind of gym-based athletes, I have no problem shelling protein. They just, they love it. They just love adding protein to everything. They probably have too much protein in their diet. When it comes to endurance athletes, I have a slightly harder time, or a little bit of a harder time, because they don't seem to be as focused on it. They're not prioritizing potentially muscle growth. But it's very, very important that endurance athletes really appreciate that they need protein in their diet in order to repair muscles, to develop muscles. And obviously you can see here, we need it for a tremendous amount of other things in our body aside from muscle repair and growth. Now, this number for endurance athletes is lower, so this is the minimum you're looking for. If you're in very much in a muscle focused phase where you are trying to gain muscle, we bring it right up. But really, anything from 1.2 to 1.6 is plenty. And what that looks like for different sized athletes, so anywhere 60 kilos right up to, what do I have here, 80 kilos. It's not a huge amount of protein, but it's enough to support your body. Again, a few of you are looking at that going, what does that look like in food? I'm going to show you that now. But on a high training day, so on a day where you're absolutely carb focused, all right, you're going out, you've got a 2-hour run, or you've got a 90-minute session, and then you're going to do your own stuff, or maybe you have a double session. You don't need to focus as much on proteins. You're aiming for that lower range. You don't need as much in your diet. And you don't really want to use what I see, this is an issue I see with athletes where, especially protein-focused ones, and they will get, say it's the lunchtime and they've already had a training session that morning and they're going to do another one that evening, and then they sit down and they have like a chicken curry, and it's just big lumps of chicken and all curry focused and just a tiny little bit of rice. And really that needs to be flipped. You don't need as much protein. You don't need as much as that chicken on that day. Your priority should be the rice on that plate. That's your focus. That's going to fuel you. So just understanding again what that looks like. So let's just kind of get a glimpse of what 20 to 40 grams of protein looks like. So again, this is the rough guide. We go by the hand. Around the size of your palm, all right, for our main meats, roughly is about 20 grams of protein. If it's, if it's gone across two, if it's a chicken breast that goes across 2 palms, or it's a steak, or it's a turkey steak, whatever it is, a piece of fish, it's roughly 40. Now again, that's not down to the gram, folks. We won't worry about it too much, but it's enough to know that we're hitting somewhere around our requirements. Now, just tin tuna, 20 grams, just I like to show that there. And then if you're plant-based, of course, you just have to pay a little bit more attention to your protein intake. It's actually, endurance athletes that are quite plant-based is brilliant because you're getting a lot of carbs from these sources as well. So you're kind of doubling up. You're getting your plant protein and you're getting a carbohydrate source. So obviously anything like edamame beans, chickpeas, lentils, any of those are very, very nutritious for everybody. And we're going to get some protein from them as well. So then some snacks in between. So you're looking at, depending on what your focus is that day, so again, if it's a high training load day where you need to up your carbohydrates, I'd absolutely pair these with some granola, or maybe you're going to put some of these on your porridge, whatever it is, or you're going to have obviously some crackers with your cheese, depending on what you're doing, but it's just showing that bringing in these kind of snacks will help kind of meet those higher levels of protein. So obviously if it's a training day, I would up these. You know, you can bring that up to at least 3 to 4 of these snacks on a rest day, a recovery day, where we're not so carb focused. These little kind of handy pouches, these, you can get these protein pouches. Aldi and Lidl are like they're nearly in competition with each other to see how many varieties they can bring out. So it's brilliant. So I would have, you know, for your own self, I would have like 7 of those in the fridge every week and just have 1 a day. You're going to up your protein by 15 to 25 grams, depending on what you're having. So that's perfect. It's just an easy way to get it up. Again, I include protein shakes down here because I do see they have their place at specific times, potentially after a hard training session, where if it's being a high intensity interval session, depending on what you're doing, a sprint session, I'm not sure, your appetite may be suppressed. So that's in itself an issue. So a later training session in the evening, or even a long endurance run that you found quite tough, that can suppress your appetite. If you're really struggling to eat afterwards, having something like a protein shake along with a couple of pieces of fruit can be a really, really efficient way to recover there. So just onto the third macronutrient here that we're going to talk about is fat. Again, I think we're gone past the terrible low-fat diets of kind of 80s and 90s where we were all terrified of fat and we didn't want it in our diets. We need fat in our diet. It is incredibly important that we get enough fat in our diet, but we want to focus on the right fats. So we do have things like trans fats. Thankfully, they're gone. They've actually been banned from Irish food, which is excellent. They were kind of contained in baked goods, biscuits and cakes and things like that, and they're gone now. Saturated fat, which is found in red meat, dairy, but that is absolutely fine in moderation. Okay, we can't be afraid, we don't need to be afraid of saturated fat anyway. We don't want to overeat on it either. But the fat we want to focus on are unsaturated fats, which we see here. So if you're looking at that board and you're thinking, geez, I do not eat anything up there, I want you to pick out one thing, just one thing that you might think, geez, I could have that. So really good way, some general nutrition advice here. Start your day. Have a big jar of nuts and a big jar of seeds on your kitchen counter. We love just hiding all of our healthy food away and presume we'll just remember it when we're running out the door, it's 6:30 in the morning, you're trying to get the kids out, whatever it is. Leave the food that you want to eat more of out on your kitchen counters, even if it's a bit cluttered, okay? Your heart will thank you in 20 years. But all you need to do, jar of mixed seeds, jar of mixed nuts, and a couple of tablespoons of seeds on your porridge, whatever it is in the morning, a handful of nuts to snack on during the day, really healthy. Now, I'm not talking about chocolate-covered peanuts and things like that, just kind of, regular, unprocessed ones, unsalted if you can. If you don't like anything here, if you know that maybe you've got smaller ones at home that won't eat anything like this, easy place to start for healthy fats, peanut butter. Just, again, 100% peanuts, no palm oil or sugar or anything like that added to it. You can get them in Lidl, quite cheap as well. Or milled seeds. In milled chia seeds, you won't notice that in things like bolognese, you won't notice it in Weetabix, you won't notice it in chili con carne or anything like that, and it's a really good addition. You don't anything with a minced dish, you won't notice any milled seeds, and we're trying to sneak them in. Before I move on from here, salmon. So, oily fish in general, I have mackerel up there as well. If you're not eating 2 portions of oily fish a week, you need to supplement. You need to supplement with a fish oil because there's something called omega-3s and it's EPA and DHA, the fatty acids. We can't synthesize them in our bodies. We must get them from food, and if you're not eating oily fish twice a week, we don't get enough. So I will provide a link to, I don't believe in spending 50, 60 euro on omega-3s either. You can get a very good omega-3 for about 20 euros. That'll last you a couple of months. But I do recommend it. Now, I do also, as much as I'm going to recommend a supplement, I encourage you to try and have oily fish if that'd be the first port of call. We always go food first because it contains lots of other nutrients as well. But omega-3s are very, not only important for our heart health, for our cognitive function, also for endurance, for reducing muscle soreness, for increasing nutrient delivery while you're exercising, and there's lots of other things around it that are shown to help improve performance. So just on touching on that. Quickly onto hydration. So we will talk about, obviously our demonstration tonight is about hydration and fueling. Hydration is one I find that athletes are a little too overconfident on because it's such an easy thing to do, drinking water, but we still don't get it right a lot of the time. And if you find that your performance is going down at all, or if you went out for 10, 15K, it's potentially your hydration protocol was off before anything else. A lot of players will jump straight to fueling, but I think when I sit down with a player, or excuse me, if I sit down with an athlete, I find that it's actually hydration is off. So really, a few things you can do straight away when you wake up in the morning, start hydrating. So that's having a bottle of water beside your bed, a glass of water beside your bed, get straight into it. Before you even get out of the bed, I would have 3 or 4 big mouthfuls while you're brushing your teeth, another 3 or 4 big mouthfuls, and start that hydration process. Aiming for about 1 litre per 25 kilo of body weight. So again, if you're 75 kilos, 3 litres. I think everyone in this room would be probably around between 2 and 3 litres. There's no set target for this. Increasing fruit and veg in your diet, it will obviously increase your water intake. If you hate drinking water, or if you have someone at home that just won't drink it, get a little bit of sugar-free MyWadi, sugar-free Robson's. That's just to save on your dental hygiene, so you're not kind of sipping a sugary drink all day long. We will talk about when it's appropriate to do that. And then looking at kind of being mindful to increase consumption after working out. So this is after your training sessions. Again, if you have a late night training session, so if you find that your runs or your training doesn't end until 8:30, 9 o'clock, you have a very short window to rehydrate, refuel, repair, do all your recovery before you go to bed. And you should be going to bed quite early as well, which we'll talk about in a second for those training adaptations. So it's just your fluid consumption, you need to kind of focus on this to make sure you're getting it right. And obviously the easiest way to do that is, we'll just talk about dehydration. I'm kind of skipping ahead here. Why we focus on this is because a very minimal amount of dehydration will actually drop your performance very quickly. All right, so as little as 2%. And why we see what happens is, so we sweat to cool our bodies down. All right, and when we can keep our body cool, it means we can keep our heart rate down. It means that we can keep exercising. And speaking personally, I'm someone that I don't actually sweat enough to keep myself cool, and I'll get quite red in the face, and I'll get a little bit gassy, and I have to kind of stop. So if you're someone that sweats a lot, it's probably a good thing. It probably means you can keep yourself quite cool and you're able to keep going. But it means that then you're at risk of dehydrating quite quickly. So you have to be kind of aware of how heavy you sweat, what kind of session you're doing, how much water you should have with you, should you have a sports drink with you, and really focus on this as part of your protocol, as part of your training protocol. An easy way to see, obviously, if you are hydrated is using colour of your urine. So we don't need to go completely clear. We don't need to go so mad at our water that, we're going to the toilet every 20 minutes or anything. But this second colour here, we're kind of going for that pale yellow colour is absolutely perfect, all right? A really good way to understand if you've actually not rehydrated well after an evening session is if the next morning you're down around here, if you kind of go to the toilet first thing after you get out of bed and you're down here, these two, it means that you haven't rehydrated well the night before. And that in itself is a little bit of an issue, because it means that our first, and we'll talk about recovery now, but our first priority when we're recovering after a session is actually to rehydrate. Don't skip ahead, start with the really basics first, which is rehydration. And if you're down around here the next morning, it means you haven't done that properly. And it just means that potentially other things may have slowed down, or the training adaptations, your refueling, your repairing may have slowed down because your body needs this first. Let's look at just quickly on the timing. So what should you aim for? The day of a training session, the day of a race, whatever it is, what are you actually trying to do? So a meal that's high in carbohydrates, that's your fuel source. You need to make sure you have enough. Low in fats. Fat will upset your digestive system very easily. If you ever find out when you go out to a warm-up and you start getting a stitch straight away, first 10 minutes of your warm-up, or you start getting a little bit, your stomach maybe starts to knot, or you potentially that you feel like nauseous, or if you need to go to the toilet, anything like that, that can come back to potentially too much fat or mistimed fat in your meals. Moderate protein is fine. Protein will come in there. It's not our focus. Lots of fluids and getting your portions right. So looking at your pre-training, so potentially, I always use 7 o'clock because it's easy for me to do the maths on this. But if you have a training session at 7 p.m. in the evening time, you're aiming for a large, high-carb meal, anywhere between 1 and 3. That gives your body enough time to digest it, absorb it, and make sure that fuel from the carbohydrates travels to your liver and travels to your muscles as glycogen. That's where it's going to be stored. It's going to be stored as glycogen. And that is going to be your fuel source during training. All right, so obviously you've got to also plan for your training session. Like, if you're going for an easy 5K in the evening time, that's going to take you 25, 30 minutes, whatever it is. You don't need to fuel up like this. Your body's not going to need a huge amount of fuel. But if you're going out doing a 60-minute, 90-minute session, it's going to be a mixture of high intensity, endurance, strength, whatever it is. Yes, you do need to make sure you fuel like this, and you'll feel much better when you do, and you'll be able to perform a lot better, and you actually be able to push yourself a little bit better as well. So this would say between 1 and 3, you're aiming for this large meal. So whatever it is, that big bowl of pasta with another, maybe you're going to have a piece of fruit, maybe you're going to have a smoothie with it, maybe you're going to have a cereal bar with it, and really, really build it out. And then about 3 hours before, okay? So if it's 7, we're talking about 4 o'clock maybe you're in work, maybe you're home, you'll have to plan for that. Then you're going to have this lighter meal. This lighter meal is going to be very low in fat. It's going to be moderately protein, depending on what it is, but it's going to be very high in simple carbs. So it's not going to be a big bowl of porridge. It's probably not going to be, even a pasta dish at that time. We're going to go a little bit simpler. And then about 60 to 90 minutes before, we're going to call it a primer snack. You're going to have something like a cereal bar, a handful of Jaffa cakes, a handful of jellies, a banana, whatever it is. It's going to be no fat, probably no protein at all in it. It's going to have lots of carbs, but it's going to have very simple carbohydrates, very easy to digest. It's going to be something you like the taste of. It's going to be handy to have. So remembering larger meals take longer to digest. We go with a light snack. Now, some people, guys, will not tolerate this. If you're going into a high intensity session, you know it's going to be tough. Or it's going to be, maybe it's a very long session. Maybe it's a 2 to 3 hour session, but it's moderate intensity. You need to make sure that, are you okay to have this? And some people can, some people can't. You kind of don't rest on your laurels with this one. You need to keep practicing it, keep trying it, because you can very much train your gut. And as endurance athletes, that is something you need to learn how to do. And we'll talk about intra-race and intra-training nutrition in a second. But you need to be able to actually train your gut to see what it can take, because if you work on this, what you're doing now will not be the same thing you're doing in 6 months' time. When I first started working with an athlete, their diet and their nutrition and this looks very different from where they've started out, because we've adapted it as we've gone and we've kind of pushed it out a little bit. And you're actually able to tolerate the more carbs that you eat, the more you're actually able to eat in the following sitting, because of those training adaptations that you've had after the carb ingestion. So just looking at fueling here. Okay, so what are we aiming to do before? This is just a handy way to remember it, all right? What are we aiming to do before the session? Well, we want to have high carbohydrate food. We know that. Fruit I always include. The fruit gets its own little thing here, because, and these are the kind of fruit that I focus on. Apples, oranges, grapes, pears, and bananas, because if you go for about the size of fists, all right, or a bunch of grapes about the size of your fist, or banana, kind of a medium banana, it's about 30 grams of carbs. So for you, even if on a training day you have 3 of these, you're roughly at about 90 grams of carbs as your requirement, which is really, really good. And it's just an easy way to do it. Super nutritious, super healthy for us as well. Now, you can include things like pineapple, mango, anything like that. Be aware that some fruit isn't as good as for fueling. So things like berries, super nutritious, really good for recovery. But a big fistful size of berries contain very few carbohydrates, so don't look to them for a fueling source. I would mainly focus, and they can have them away, like don't get me wrong, if you want to have them on a training day, have them on a training day, but don't think, I'm going to have that's going to be loads of fuel for later, because they don't actually work like that. So definitely I'd maybe shift them to a recovery, have them afterwards, or just kind of don't include them in your fueling when you're counting up your carbohydrates. Frequency, which I just spoke about there, so that's the 6-3-1. 6 hours out, kind of having that large meal, 3 hours out, having a lighter snack, and then an hour out, that primer snack there. Our fluid, which we spoke about there. So again, if you're having a training session at 7 o'clock, and your aim is to have 2 litres, don't think drinking 2 litres from 5:30 to 7 o'clock is going to work for you, okay? Really what you're aiming to do in that 2 hours before, if your training session's at about 7, you're hydrating from as soon as you wake up, and you're drinking about 500 mils, so like a pint of water, a regular bottle of water, in around that 2 hours before training. Of course, everything else combine or can contribute to it as well. It's not just water, tea, coffee, milk, anything like that will as well. And then just this forbidden 4, guys, we talk about, okay? So anything that's spicy, anything that's deep fried, anything that's high in fat, anything that's really high in fiber, try to avoid it in the 2 to 4 hours before, depending on how much you're able to tolerate. But definitely kind of no fry-ups an hour before you go out and try and run, because again, if you've ever felt just like a bad stitch in your side, cramping, nausea, anything like that will more than likely come back to this mistimed intake of food. So just be kind of very important on those ones. These ones here, guys, this is that lighter meal I spoke about that you're looking for about 3 hours before. This is what this looks like. Okay, so the targets we're looking for is 1 to 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight, but I don't want to get too fussed up about that. You can see here at the top what we look for players, athletes having there. This is the kind of food we talk about. Okay, so fueling smoothie, I'm going to actually provide a PDF for some fueling and recovery smoothies as well. But you can see here, this is all very light, high carb, easy digested foods. These packet pancakes, guys, very handy way to get some easy carbs in, 3 or 4 of them. Same with crumpets, toast and jam. Cereals, so like Rice Krispies, Frosties, cornflakes, anything like that. Big bowls of that, loads of carbs, loads of fueling in them. If you're on the go and you just have to run into the shop, you're just getting some orange juice and a cereal bar, anything like a bagel and honey, a bagel and banana will all give you lots and lots of fueling. So you're aiming for that about, again, roughly we're talking 2 to 3 hours before the session, and working on your intake as well, making sure you're able to tolerate it at that time and what kind of portions you're able to tolerate. What we're doing during training, so if you're going anywhere past 60 minutes, you need additional fueling. All right, your body needs additional fueling. You need to start bringing some fuel in. All right, this is especially important if you're doing any competitions that are longer than 60 minutes. You have to practice this in training. You never, ever, ever go out to a competition trying something new. It's a disaster. So you want to make sure that anything you're doing during training sessions. So any training sessions above 60 minutes. What we require is an absolute minimum of 30 grams of carbs per hour thereafter. All right, and I'll show you some examples now in a second. So this, as much as this applies to endurance, this is the kind of thing we bring in team sports as well. So soccer, Gaelic, things like that. We do look at this kind of stuff. But obviously for runs, anything, if you're going doing a 10K and you're averaging, if you're running in 50, 55 minutes, you probably don't need much. But if you're going doing anything that's above the hour, you do. So for every hour you're going to be out there after, you're bringing a snack with 30 grams of carbohydrates to have. And again, this has to be tried in training. It does not just happen on race day. And this will make sure that you're fueled up, that you don't, I'm sure you can appreciate, like usually the first thing to go is actually your head rather than your body. Your body will continue long after your head is given up. But if you can make sure you're doing things like this, because our brains require an awful lot of glucose, especially when we're exercising, having strategies like this in place will keep you focused and will make sure you can keep on pushing. So these are the kind of things we look at, stuff that's roughly 30 grams, very roughly 30 grams here. So again, this is stuff that you practice in training, and it's stuff you practice over and over and over again before you go out and you do it in a competitive setting. So really simple stuff. Like obviously these are, I think, ones like we're looking at, the way I look at it with athletes is like what's cost effective and what works for you. So look, if you want to go and spend 30 quid on 12 gels and that works for you, that's great, but you're going to have to keep buying them. If you can find something like, you can make a very cheap sports drink at home and that works for your first hour of training, and then if you need to do something after that, you can go with jellies or whatever suits you really. But it's just understanding what you can do in order to keep yourself fueled. So just on to recovery there. So after the session, so that's before the session, that's during the session. Then after the session, okay, we've got our 5 R's. And again, so we have our 5 F's of fueling. These are 5 R's of recovery. What's your priority? We just spoke about it a few minutes ago. It's rehydration. People will jump straight for the stuff that won't have as big an impact, but getting your fluids back in, especially after long sessions. The more you're training, the more you're going to sweat, all right? So even if you're a light sweater, you'll probably end up losing some fluid during the session. Very easy way to figure out how much you're losing. So say if you've got a very set session you do on a Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, whatever it is, jump on a scales, just maybe have your shoes off, whatever you want, don't have a tremendous amount of gear on you. See what weight you are. Go out and do your session, drink as normal. There's one thing I always say about, especially Irish people, you tell them you're watching them once and then they'll change everything they're doing. So just because you're actually you're doing a little experiment for yourself, don't drink more, don't drink less than you usually would. Just do what you usually do during the session. And then come back in, jump back on the scales, and see what the weight difference is. So what you're doing, you're aiming to replace 150% of your losses. So if you lose a kilo during the session, you're aiming to replace it with 1.5 litres in the 1 to 3 hours afterwards. So very simply, again, if you lose 2 kilos, that's you're aiming to replace it with 3 litres of water afterwards. Now, if you find that you're not losing any weight during the session, that means that you're hydrating well going into it and you're hydrating well throughout it. So perfect. But most people will lose it. So yeah, I've worked with 60 kilo women who during an hour of a run can lose up to 4 kilos. So it's something to be very important just to be aware of, because you mightn't be doing this properly and then that's actually having a huge knock-on effect and you're getting a bit lost in like what you should actually focus on. Then refueling. So I'm going to talk about refueling and repairing in a second because I have a full slide in it. That is essentially carbohydrates and protein. That's going to be our recovery. Replenishing. So this is in the hours after a session, up to 24 hours after session, make sure you're getting some plant-based food in. So make sure you're getting additional fruit and veg. Because you intentionally exercise multiple times a week probably, and you're doing so at a high level, you're going to need more than the average person. So when we talk about 5 a day for the general population, if you're putting additional stress in your body, you need to have more than 5 fruit and veg a day. I would say try and get to 6 and 7 if you can. If you're at 1 at the moment, don't stress, just try and get the 2. But really, you probably need more fruit and veg than the average person if you're doing additional exercise. And then rest. This is a huge one. I have a couple of slides on sleep here, guys, but just getting your rest right. You sleep, we always talk about this with sleep. If you could put all of the performance-enhancing effects of 8 hours of consistent sleep into a tablet or into a pill, it would be illegal. It would be banned because it's that good for performance. It wouldn't be allowed. So getting that right as well. So if you've done a huge session, prioritize sleeping. Try not to drink after, it'll just slow everything down as well. So just onto those like recovery snacks. So what are we aiming for after the session? We're aiming for carbs and protein, roughly anywhere between kind of 60 to 80 grams of carbs and up to 30 grams of protein. And all of these things will cover it. But again, what I see athletes making an issue, or the first mistake they make is that they'll go straight for something like a protein shake, a whey protein shake, and they'll just make that with water and they think that's recovering. That's not recovering. What you've lost throughout that session is predominantly carbohydrate. Yes, you've broken your body down, you've broken your muscles down, and you need to repair those with a good protein intake. But really, your absolute priority straight away is carbohydrates. Protein, that can come that comes as a less priority than the carbs. So really that's what you're focusing on. But ideally you're combining the two. So again, you can see easy ways to do it, like a big winner with nearly every athlete I work with is chocolate milk and a piece of fruit because it's just handy. It's especially, I'll talk about milk in a second, but you're hydrating as well. But there's lots of ways to do this, and just don't think because you think, all I want you to do is kind of pull out one thing from this slide that would suit you to do it. And again, I'll give a PDF on some fueling and recovery shakes because I find they're very easy, especially after intense long sessions. Your appetite will be suppressed. That just naturally happens. So getting it in a kind of fluid intake will make it easier. Just onto milk. So, and I'm not sponsored by anybody, by the way, just in case before I start talking, it seems I love milk. But milk is proven to be one of the best sports drinks out there. It will rehydrate you quicker than what I'm going to make you here. It will also help you repair, refuel, and replenish, especially if you're getting something like this, fortified milk. And you don't always have to go for the brand name because you can get that a lot cheaper in Lidl or Aldi. You can get them, the kind of big ones. But about 500 mils, if you have a pint of milk after a session, it'll give you about 23 grams of fast-acting carbs, about 18 grams of very optimal protein because the protein that's in milk is actually high in leucine, which we need a certain amount of to make sure we can repair our muscles. And obviously it's full of vitamins and minerals as well that will ultimately help you recover. So without getting too distracted, like I see a lot of athletes that get very distracted with protein powders and lots of other things to help them recover, and just very simple stuff works the best. And that's always how it is with nutrition. Keeping it simple is the best way to do it. So I always encourage my athletes to, if you can, have a pint of milk after your session with a piece of fruit, or a pint of milk during the day, or make sure you're getting enough milk in your diet if you can. Now, if you're lactose intolerant, Obviously, you can actually start getting lactose milk now, or if you're allergic to maybe milk proteins, there's other ways and means of doing that as well. But if you can, I'd opt to go for a fortified milk. If you're training early in the morning, so this is obviously an important one to cover, because if you're training at 10 o'clock in the morning, how can you do the 6 hours of fueling that I just spoke about? Well, you're not going to be able to. So if you've got an early morning training session, going out for a run, whatever it is, a large high carb meal before bed the night before, as late as you can, without disrupting sleep. Okay, so what that will do is actually, because we do burn a huge amount of energy in our sleep, we're really realizing it or not, okay? And if you have your last meal at 6 o'clock and then you have a snack then before in the evening time, whatever, you will have depleted carb stores the next morning. But if you can have a high carb meal, so it doesn't have to be like a big pasta dish or a big dinner. It can be like breakfast for dinner. You can have 3 or 4 Weetabix and a banana, whatever it is, as late as you can, whatever you're comfortable having. That will help the next day. And then if you're up early, there's no point, if you're training at 9 o'clock, there's no point in having a massive bowl of porridge at 8:30, because you'll probably end up seeing it again or something if you're doing any kind of high intensity training or long training. So something like just having a coffee and a small piece of fruit, very small bowl of cereal, something sugary again, just to help you along your way. But begin hydrating as soon as you wake up. That's really important. And then this is more important, after your session. Because it's absolutely fine if you can't eat before a session. You can there's more advanced strategies called training low, where you actually intentionally don't give your body enough carbohydrates in order to fuel, and it forces your body to develop its ability to burn fat. So that is a strategy that can be used. But if you do that, make sure that, like, if you're not eating a huge amount before that early morning session, or you are doing a fasted session or intentionally doing a double session and not kind of replacing carbohydrates, make sure that you're actually recovering well. So make sure that you're doing everything you should be doing afterwards that we spoke about there, and having a meal and not leaving it, just to get those levels back up again. Just the last couple of slides here, and then we're going to wrap up. But again, I touched on sleep there a second, so it's just appreciating how much sleep you need. So sleep is the forgotten health pillar. So aside from endurance sports, aside from athletic ability, you need to make sure you're prioritizing sleep just for your lifelong health, okay? And you can see here, like, I don't know if anybody, it's something I work on regularly, and I'm still not getting enough sleep as I know, as much as I know I need. So if you're looking at that and you're looking at your age group thinking, I don't get anywhere near that, it's definitely something to start looking at, because sleep, look, it's been studied for decades, and it's been studied for decades around athletic ability. All right, and so it's no secret that if we can get decent sleep, that we play better, we perform better, and we compete better. But on the other side of things, if you consistently get less than 8 hours, it'll double your risk of injury. And again, that's a well-proven factor around sleep and athletic ability, that you just double your risk of injury. So if you can think of the last time you had an injury that knocked you out for a few weeks, what was your sleep like around it? And could that have been a contributing factor? And then less than 8 hours actually triples your risk of illness. So again, think of the last time you were sick. Was it a high stress time in your life? Were you not sleeping enough? Were you not kind of eating the foods you should eat? Because again, this has been well established. Slow skill development as well. So again, if you're bussing yourself in a training session, trying to get the most out of it, and then you end up going home and staying awake till 4 o'clock in the morning on social media or whatever it was, have you actually, has that slowed down the potential adaptation you could have made from that session? And then outside of that, in general, we have poor sleep is linked to weight gain. It affects your appetite. So sleep on two sides, it may suppress your appetite. So if you have a big race coming up or training session coming up and you're trying to eat more, and then you find you're struggling, or on the other side of things, what sleep can do is it can obviously affect our hunger hormones. So we want quick energy food. Now, I know we've spoken about quick energy food being good for performance, but if you're kind of opting for, a croissant and a coffee rather than your big bowl of porridge because you've got training that night, that's an issue. So you need to kind of look at that as well. If anybody struggles to fall asleep at nighttime, which is something when I work with athletes, we deal a lot in, okay? So I like to give this quickly because a lot of people do suffer to fall asleep. 8 hours out, guys, no more caffeine. Even if you're, if you think that, I can have a cup of coffee and go to bed, no problem at all. It'll still may affect your level of sleep that you go into. So like we've got our 3 stages of sleep, which is light, REM, and deep sleep. And you need REM and deep sleep in order to make training adaptations and repair muscles. So caffeine may be affecting your ability to fall asleep, but also your ability to sleep well. Also note that if you struggle to fall asleep at nighttime, how much tea are you having in the evening time? Remember that caffeine is in tea. So if you have 3 or 4 cups of tea between, 7 o'clock and 10 o'clock, that could be the equivalent of, a cup of coffee. So you have to be aware of those things. Any energy drinks, and I'm not talking about these kind of energy drinks, I'm talking about Red Bull, Monster, Bolt, any of those. If you're very caffeine sensitive, things like dark chocolate, Coca-Cola, green tea has caffeine in it as well. So I would be if you struggle to fall asleep at nighttime, be very strict for a little while. Going to decaf tea, no coffee at all, obviously, in the evening times. I would switch out, if you're trying to get to sleep by 10:30, 11 o'clock, you're talking no caffeine after lunchtime. And if you think to yourself, God, I'll never get through an afternoon without caffeine, that's how I get through my work day. If it's having a knock-on effect on your sleep, and as a consequence, then you're tired and then you reach for caffeine, you need to knock yourself out of that cycle, because that's an issue. So 2 hours out then, this is a gun. So reducing all overhead lighting, all side lamps, all slow, kind of low lamps. Overhead lighting will stimulate us. Looking at the time you're having your last meal at. Now, this can be kind of multifactorial. So if you are eating quite late, that can stimulate you and keep you awake. On the other hand, if you find that you're like, no, I actually don't eat late in the evening time, it may be optimal to include a meal. So a high carb meal can actually help with sleep as well. So, it's great if you have training the next day, because you're hitting 2 birds at 1 stone. But if you bring in a high carb meal, if you find that you don't eat after 6 o'clock or whatever it is, a higher carb meal later in the evening can help you sleep. And then reducing screen time. Again, that's something I think we all know, that we should not be on our phones in the evening time. It's a stimulus. We don't produce enough of melatonin to fall asleep then. And again, if you're sitting with a phone 6 inches away from your face in bed, if it's a tablet, if it's an iPhone, whatever it is, we're not switching off. We're not doing that wind down period that we need. 30 minutes out, if I can give you the best advice and one of the best tactics that I use with athletes to get them to fall asleep quicker at nighttime is reading a book, like a good old-fashioned page book. And this is something anecdotal and proven, but the more I use this with athletes, the more success I see with it. And and it doesn't happen within one night. But if you can get it going for 2, 3, 4 weeks, your brain has that sleep association with reading a book in the environment, and it'll go sleep. Now, again, probably don't go for something too exciting either, because it could, again, you kind of want to stay up that way. So, and then in a cold, dark, quiet room, that's what you're aiming for to help fall asleep. Now, obviously, anybody with small kids is probably cursing me right now, because this isn't as easy as that, but it's just something to try and bring in. Sleep is something that can be developed. It's not something, it's very much like I would use it as a training protocol with my athletes, much like you go out and train to get faster, fitter, stronger, you train your body to sleep better, all right? And it's something that it can take weeks, months, years, but we spend a lot of our time sleeping during our lives, and getting, I suppose, being able to do it well is very important for our health and for our performance. Just quickly onto these. So if you do consider taking a supplement, folks, just remember this. You have to ask yourself 3 questions. Is it safe? Is it legal? Is it effective? And if you answer no to any of those, you don't take it. Be very careful about what you put into your body. Because you can get supplements without a prescription, people think that it's absolutely fine, just take whatever's out there. And I saw such and such on the internet taking it, or on social media taking it, or I heard that this athlete who runs with that club takes it. That's not good enough when it comes to your health. So if you're competitive and you're being tested, you obviously have to be very careful about these things. But and I would always recommend going with supplements that are certified by Informed Sport. So they'll have an Informed Sport logo on them at the bottom corner. They'll just have, obviously it's not on this, but they'll just have it down here. It's a little yellow icon. They have an app as well, Informed Sport, that you can check any supplements on. But I just wouldn't recommend taking anything that's not certified by them, because it means it hasn't kind of passed the rigor it should. So just knowing that ones that, again, I'm not going to, I have no way of time to go into all of these, but stuff that is safe and proven and effective for endurance sports. So omega-3s, vitamin D, caffeine, creatine, sodium bicarbonate, beetroot juice, protein powder, and tart cherry juice. So at the end, if anybody does have any questions about these, I'm happy to answer them. But there would be a lot to cover in there. But these are the ones that I have used with athletes that are completely safe, proven, and effective. So just onto the last couple of slides here. So just for any women, just in terms of the menstrual cycle and performance. So again, there's not a huge amount of time to go into this, but it's just understanding that if you're on a natural cycle, so if you're not on any contraceptive, that you need to be tracking where you are in your cycle around your training, just to understand what effects it has on your overall kind of decision making, motivation, your energy levels, things like that. So there's an app that I recommend. It's called Fitter Woman. If you're not using it, it has a tremendous amount of information just around, again, fueling, recovering, what to expect, tracking symptoms, you know, how regular your cycle is, so you can spot if there's any issues. So really good for throwing up red flags around if you're not fueling enough, eating enough food, because again, like I said, in women, the first thing we'll see as a consequence of under eating is the menstrual cycle will be affected. Now, just on to the last one we're going to do here. So I just want to show you guys how to make a homemade sports drink. Very, very easy to do. If we've gone through that and you think, okay, I am going to start fueling, once we get past 60 minutes, that I am going to fuel, I'm going to make sure that I have something with me. The easiest thing you can do if you've never eaten during training sessions before, please don't jump straight to having a cereal bar in the middle of your run, because that could be a disaster, but is obviously is getting fluids in. You're going to have to get fluids in anyway if you go above 60 minutes. You'd be encouraging you to drink kind of before that. So getting a fluid in that's going to obviously hydrate you and fuel you at the same time is ideal. So would you believe that it is nearly impossible to get cordial with sugar in it these days? I went to 3 different shops. You just can't get them. So there's a few different ways of making this. I've just got some barley water, kind of the Robson's barley water here. You can get... What we can do is use just some cordial, but you can add 4 teaspoons of sugar into, or of regular table sugar. So you would use a litre of water, 4 teaspoons of table sugar, and then some cordial, and then that will make the isotonic drink. So isotonic drink is basically the ratio of sugar to water in it, and it encourages gastric emptying. So what it does is it increases the amount of water and fluid you're able to absorb and fuel you're able to absorb during kind of moderate to high intensity exercise. So very simply, all we have is 200 mils of our cordial. Now what you can do is actually do 50-50 split with this as well, with regular apple juice and orange juice. So 500 mils of apple juice or orange juice, and put it into, like I always make my stuff in here, into a glass bottle, and then you're going to add 500 mils of, everything is added up to a litre, so basically another 500 mils of water, and then we're going to do a quarter teaspoon of salt, and the salt will help replace our electrolytes. So instead of look, it can be expensive if you're trying all the time just to have Lucozade or buy bottles of Lucozade. Look, they're €2 or €3. You can get cheaper ones in Lidl and stuff like that, I know, but to be honest with you, if you're doing this 3, 4, 5, 6 times a week, I like to be very cost effective with my stuff. So this is just an easy way to do it at home. And I would keep this in the fridge and have it. And then whatever I want to use out of it, maybe I don't want the full 500 mils, I'll get a smaller bottle and I pour this out. So we just add our salt in. This is all that's in Lucozade, by the way, guys. This is all you want, and then that's it. So make up a couple of those at the start of the week. You have them if you want, whatever you're using them, and then use as much as you need, and that's it.